So we are live. So bear with us, folks. As you know, it takes a couple of minutes before we get settled in and get out to social media. But to get started, we're with a legend that is Rick Peacock-Edwards. So yeah, Rick, what's been happening since the last time we spoke?
Well, I've been sort of busy in many ways, continuing my life and sort of dealing. I'm very involved with air shows in the summer at the moment.
Yes, yes.
And of course in the winter months, I never thought I'd write one book, but now I've written two, or co-produced the second one, I should say. So my second book goes live sort of in a couple of weeks' time.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that because there's actually a big event coming up if you guys are going to RIAT. There's a new book coming out called The Nat Boys, and the Boys series is actually quite famous, isn't it, Rick? So can you tell us a bit about The Nat Boys? And you're working with Tom Eales, who I've worked with before, so tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, the Nat is one of four aircraft in which I've got over 1,000 hours on, and I've loved every one of the aircraft, quite frankly. But the Nat I always regarded as a little sports car, and I was aware that there was, the Boys series. There's Phantom Boys and Tornado Boys and Lightning Boys, but there was never a Nat Boys. So my publisher and I sort of sat down and spoke. My publisher's Grub Street, and he said, well, really, Rick, I like Nat Boys. So that was music to my ears, because being a former Nat pilot and a chap who loved the Nat, I said, right, I've got it on. Then I sort of co-opted Tom Eales, who's a good friend, to help me, and we produced what I think is going to be a really fantastic book. We've got some amazing stories in this book that's coming out, and it covers those who flew the Nat, from the Red Arrows to the instructors in the Air Force, to those who flew it in India in the Indo-Pakistani wars, to the Finns who flew it, and it's still being flown to today, of course, from North Wales. So it covers a complete 50 years plus, and the stories are amazing. I think anybody who buys it, I can promise you, and this is not a selling sort of a point, I'm just trying to say, in all honesty, I think you're going to buy a really, really good book, which is going to be well worth reading. And we've got lots of stories from lots of people, not just a few people, lots of people, because we've included a chapter on short stories. So that includes people who've written literally 2 paragraphs to, or even 2 lines to 2 paragraphs to a page. So we've got a lot of input from former Nat pilots, a lot of whom are very household names, quite frankly, in the aviation community. It's going to be a great book.
Absolutely, but you and Tom are doing a signing at RIAT, which I think is the biggest air show in Europe, on the 16th and 17th of July. So where can we find you if anyone wants to come over and get a book?
You'll find us in the stand that is occupied by the Aviation Bookshop, which is a fantastic organisation run by a chap called Simon Watson. He sells an amazing array of books, and I will be there with Tom and my publisher, Grub Street, signing under the auspices of the Aviation Bookshop, and I will be there on both days.
Brilliant. And obviously our viewers will be able to see on the right, obviously your first book, Rate of Climb. Are you bringing any of them copies down to RIAT for maybe to purchase and get signed?
Absolutely. That actually, funnily enough, that book is still selling well. In fact, I've been out to a few air shows in recent weeks with my publisher, and we continue to sell a lot of them. So, I can't complain.
Brilliant. Well, if you want to go and get the books...
Except I might add, Mike, my royalty, believe me, I didn't write these books for money. My royalties are enough to buy a good bottle of wine.
That's all you need, Rick. That's all you need. So if you want to go and get Rick's book, all the links in the description. But as you can see, there's some questions coming in there on the side, Rick. So I'm going to let you loose. And guys, get your questions come in and enjoy it.
Right. Okay. Let's start at the top. Did they still have the 1,000 mile an hour club when you flew the Lightning? Well, the answer is yes. And I still got my 1,000 miles an hour certificate. I'm very proud of it too. very proud. And the next one was from Adam Cotton. Care to tell us about the Earl of Westfield? There's a story behind that, actually, because when I was flying Phantoms at this time on Trevor 1 Squadron up at Lucas, we had a fantastic, excellent US Marine exchange officer there who was a great pilot. His nickname was Circus, a chap called Dave Stamper. He lives in Miami. He's been a good friend. And he came, and he was a great friend of mine, not just in the air, but on the squash court and the tennis court and the golf course as well, and in the bar. And he came to stay with me sort of one time when I was living down in Sussex, until that was about 20 years ago now. And we had a fantastic time down there, and we played golf, and I lived in a place called Westfield. So he sort of christened me the Earl of Westfield. So that's where that comes from. And even today, when I get a Christmas card from him every year, it's addressed to the Earl of Westfield. Chris here, would you be able to tell us about being on Battleflight at Goodisloe, the routine and the day-to-day activity? Yes, very exciting. Goodisloe was a fantastic place. The closest RAF base to the other side, and it wasn't far away at all, in the Cold War days, and we all knew there that the Cold War was very real. It's a fantastic base. We had 2 Lightning squadrons, we had 2 Hunter squadrons, we had an RAF regiment squadron, we had ground-to-air missile squadron. It was very real stuff. But Battleflight, we had 2 aircraft on Battleflight, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, and we were at 5 minutes readiness, day and night, and we got scrambled a lot. Now, most of our scrambles, well, I say most, we got scrambled a lot. I can tell you that sort of we weren't sitting in the cockpit, we were in the crew room. The aircraft were primed, ready to go, so when the hooter went, and it was a real hooter, you knew when it had sounded. And in the middle of the night, if it sounded, you never really slept at night, you dozed, although you did get into bed, believe it or not. We slept in our sort of flying kit, but you were always ready, and it would happen. And you'd run for the aircraft, and the ground crew would run, and everybody was well practiced, and it worked. And at night time, I can tell you that from a standing start, we'd probably be airborne with normally at just over 4 minutes from the hooter going. And if we weren't airborne within 5, then questions were asked. But what did we get scrambled for? We got scrambled because on the other side, our opposition were MiG-21s. And there were a lot of MiG-21s there, and they would test our reaction. And they'd sort of scramble from their base, and they'd scramble towards the border, and they'd be seen coming, and we'd get scrambled, and we'd be up there. And before we got there, they would just sort of nip in the border and back on the other side. So they were testing our reaction. And then invariably we'd end up sort of us going down one side of the border and the MiG-21s going down the other side of the border. We could see each other, but it was very real. But I have to say that we got scrambled for the odd airliner that had a problem or wasn't speaking to anybody. But most of our scrambles, believe it or not, were for light aircraft. We had the border. The border was there, and with it on our side of the border, within I think it was 10 miles, we had a buffer zone, and nobody was allowed into the buffer zone. And in Germany, in those days, we would always fly around, listening out on the emergency frequency, so that the ground control stations, if they wanted to, if they saw somebody intruding, they could put out a call, and the call was brass monkey, brass monkey, brass monkey. And on that call, everybody turned west to identify themselves. But that's not what I'm talking about now. I'm talking about the scramble. Majority of our scrambles were actually to intercept light aircraft. These aircraft that were doing anything from 100 to 130 knots mainly, and I was flying a Lightning, which really couldn't come much slower than about 180 knots. But the Lightning was a big aircraft. It weighed 20 tons, and it was fully armed, and we had procedures that we went through. And when they saw a big Lightning, these light aircraft, we'd intercept them. We'd be controlled towards them. We'd pick them up on our radar. We'd intercept them, and we'd come past them and they'd see us, and they got the message. They got the message, and we got their numbers. And they probably got a fairly hefty fine, if not the removal of their license. So that's what occupied most of our time. We did get scrambled from there as well. Sometimes we get scrambled to get airborne and come right the way across to the UK, to the range, the Aberporth range in Cardigan Bay off Wales, which is the place where we go to launch our missiles. We go across there, launch our missile, and then land at RAF Valley before recovering to Goodisloe. So there were many things that sort of occupied our time on Battleflight. But I will just say that one time in particular, I was on Battleflight, 1968, which ages me considerably. But I remember the Russians had just invaded Czechoslovakia. And one of our duties in Germany was because Berlin was a city that was isolated from the West, but for air corridors, 3 air corridors that connected it. And in the process of invading Czechoslovakia, the Russians had closed the air corridors. Well, we had procedures. We knew what we were going to do if the corridors got closed, which they were. So we brought a lot of aircraft up on state, ready to react. And basically, a transport probe would have been sent down the corridor with the escort of fighters. That was us. So the plan, we'd go down there, not knowing what's going to happen, to see what would happen. Well, so we were getting quite excited. The adrenaline was flowing, as you might imagine. We had the whole squadron armed up, ready to go. All I can say on this particular occasion that the politics won the day, and the corridors got reopened. So it didn't happen. But we were ready for it. Bit of a long-winded answer to your question. All I would say is that Battleflight was very exciting. And incidentally, only 3 years ago now, 4 years ago, in 1918, 50 years after 1968, when we did this, I went back to Goodisloe with 3 or 4 of my pilot friends who'd been on the squadron with me to celebrate the 50th anniversary of us being on the squadron. And we went to Goodisloe, which was nice but sad, because the Goodisloe that we remembered wasn't there. It was now a totally derelict place. The runway was there with tufts of grass sticking out of it. Battleflight was still there, where the aircraft were, so that was very nostalgic to see that. And lots of other buildings were there. It was a lovely place, but it brought memories back. Quite a nostalgic experience. Anyway, long-winded answer to that one. So where we got to next? Have you heard of the IAI F4 Super Phantoms that flew an air show in 1987? And vastly upgraded engines and at least 1 ton less. Now, the answer to that is yes, I have. I mean, the Phantom, you're talking about Phantoms there. The Phantom was a brilliant aircraft. It was a real war machine. It was a real sort of, and it went through many upgrades. It's still flying in parts of the world to this day. It was a hugely capable aircraft, and I know the aircraft you're talking about, and yes, they did go through those upgrades. During a tornado takeoff, what was the procedure of holding at the end of the runway at full dry power? Now you got me thinking. Now I'm trying to remember my tornado days, sort of, and what we would basically sort of, we get to the end of the runway, we'd increase the engines to full dry power. We'd let them, what we call, soak there. We'd have a look at the RPMs and the jet pipe temperatures. We would be basically making sure that the engines were properly, were meeting their specifications before we rolled and before we plugged in the burners. In fact, we put in the burners then and then roll. So that was what that was about. It was just a procedure more than anything else. From Bill, favorite aircraft and favorite squadron. That's pretty simple, actually. All I'll say is that I've loved every aircraft I've flown. And I'll just relay some of them. I trained on the Jet Provost. I went to the NAT. advanced training on the Nat, the Hunter for tactical training before pre-Lightning training, then the Lightning. Then I went back to the Nat. Then I flew the Phantom. Then I had flew the Tornado. I was the first RAF pilot to fly the fighter version of the Tornado. And then so it went on. I flew the Tornado for many years. And then I had a fantastic job as Inspector of Flight Safety when I flew everything, quite frankly, and had my eyes open wide. I can honestly say that I've loved every aircraft I've flown, but that wasn't the question. Which is my favorite? It has to be the Lightning. The Lightning was my first aircraft. That's what drew me into I joined the RAF from South Africa. My father was a Battle of Britain pilot, so it was in the blood. And I honestly didn't think that I would be eligible to join the RAF. And then one night, I was at university in Johannesburg, and my father could tell I had itchy feet. And he said, "Have you thought about joining the RAF, Rick?" And I said, "Well, I have, yes, but I honestly don't think I can. I don't think I'm eligible." And he said, "Well, I've done my research, and you are." So that set me off. And but for my father's research, that really set me off. And then I saw this advert that said, "Join the Royal Air Force and the world is your oyster." And on the front cover, there was a squadron of Lightnings, and the pilots were walking back. And I just looked at it and I said, "That is me." And from that moment onwards, I was single-mindedly, I just wanted to fly the Lightning. And I had 2 tours on the Lightning, 1,500 hours, and I loved every single moment of it. And of course, it was a manned rocket. It really was a manned rocket, and a single-seater. I was flying the Lightning at age 22, and I used to sort of bash the side of my head, and I said, "I just don't believe this, that I'm even being trusted to fly one of these things." It was just a beautiful aircraft, and it's still my favorite aircraft to today. Ever come across Rich Davis, RAF? The answer is yes, I have. Yes, I have. Cheers. Then moving on down. Boom, 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 boom. Can't quite read that one. Timberwolf IAI prototype. Oh, that's Neuropilot. Oh, that sounds good. Basil McGear and Nice. I worked PWF. Okay. Lucky you. You worked on a lot of good aircraft there. How many same you trick in the F4? How many same you trick? I'm not quite sure I fully understand that question. All I say is I've got over 1,000 hours in the F4. It was different from the Phantom. From the Lightning, but I enjoyed it no less. The F4 was a hugely capable war machine, and I loved flying it and operating it. Very, very capable aircraft. Still is. I cheat with unlimited weaponry, but I'm the only target against all of them. I like that one. Lightning must have been lovely to fly, but all fighters have their vices. Can you speak on the difficulties of flying the airplane? I didn't have any difficulty flying the aircraft. I can honestly say, quite frankly, that the Lightning to me was pretty viceless. The Phantom had a couple of vices, but the Lightning was really sort of it was just a beautiful aircraft to fly, and the engines were so powerful it would blast you out of anything, quite frankly. Regarding tornado fins, what are the protrusions on the upper and lower part for? Well, as far as I can remember, on the fins, they were mainly to do with some of the communications equipment we had on board. I can't remember exactly. I mean, I would have to look at my sort of documents to sort of see what we had. We had so many protrusions and things for so many reasons, but the protrusions, if they weren't to do with measuring sort of height and speed, pitot tubes and that sort of thing, then they were normally to do with communications. And I'm pretty sure that what we had on the fin was to do with HF, as far as I recall, but I might be wrong there. Boom, boom, boom. Have you ever had a serious in-flight emergency? The answer is yes. Yep, the answer is yes. I've had many emergencies in my life, and in fact, on the Lightning, we used to have an emergency on pretty regularly on sorties. Most of them were pretty minor, but we were highly trained. I mean, on the Lightning in particular, we were single seat, so unlike the Phantom and the Tornado, we had a back seater who would you'd go through the emergency drills together. On the Lightning, there was no back seater to sort of help you with that. You had to know the drills backwards, and you had to know how to react immediately because things happen so quickly. So we obviously had a simulator, although on the Lightning, unlike the Phantom and the Tornado and modern simulators, which have visual, we had no visual on the Lightning when I flew it. So it was, simulated sorties were high pressure. They really got you sort of going, but they sort of taught you one hell of a lot before you got into the air. We had to be, on the Lightning, we had to be really up to speed with it and sharp. You didn't have time to think about a problem. You just had time to know automatically what to do and to react. It was that quick. Right. At Tibble, Mach 1.5 plus with another F4 passing very close at Mach 3 closure. Okay. Don't think that's a question, but I understand. Did you ever fly from or into Gardenkirchen? The answer is no, I didn't. 92 Squadron, which was my favorite squadron. I don't think I answered that question earlier on. Lightning was my favorite aircraft. The 92 Squadron was my favorite squadron. It was my first squadron, and I'm still very closely involved with 92 Squadron, which when it converted to which is a very famous squadron from World War II, and it was also famous because it was the home of the Blue Diamond aerobatic team in the 1950s, and then they converted from Hunters onto Lightnings, and they were based at a place called Leconfield in Yorkshire, and then they got sent with 19 Squadron out to Germany. 19 Squadron at that stage went to Gütersloh, 92 Squadron went to Gardenkirchen. I actually sort of then 92 Squadron was moved from Gardenkirchen in January 1968, I think it was, from Gardenkirchen to Gütersloh, and I actually joined the squadron. I was the first pilot to join the squadron at Gütersloh at the end of January 1968. So the answer to your question is I didn't go to Gardenkirchen. The RF4 were the fastest. I don't agree with that, quite frankly. Hey Rick, on scramble from North Scotland out over the sea, which bomber type did you intercept? Did the Lightning have any radar guided missiles? Guided from your radar, I just see heat seekers on them. Well, I'll answer that question. I flew the Lightning from Gütersloh, which was, as I say, sort of very much associated with the other side, and wasn't associated with intercepting the bombers out over the North Sea. Then I came back to Caldershall, where I was on 65 Squadron, where I did have an operational task that was mainly sort of most of my job was to train the pilots going to Germany to fly the Lightning. So most of my intercepts out over the North Sea were actually on the Phantom when I was at RAF Lucas, and I did plenty of those, and they were very exciting. And at Lucas, it wasn't called Battleflight; it was called Quick Reaction Alert. And the Phantoms, we had two Phantoms like Germany, but on this occasion they were at 10 minutes readiness. And the big difference between sitting alert at Lucas compared with Gütersloh was we normally had sort of much more sort of warning of, not always, but much more warning of what was going to happen, because intelligence would feed us, and the aircraft that we were going to intercept would get airborne from northern Russia, a place called Murmansk mainly, and they come around the top of Norway, known as the North Cape, And literally they come around there, and it was a real sort of NATO exercise, because we worked very closely with the Norwegians, for obviously flying out of Norway, with the Americans flying out of Iceland, and ourselves. And we'd be working with GCI, ground controlled intercept stations, in all those countries. And we'd also have airborne early warning aircraft like the AWACS. Initially, the Americans provided the AWACS coming out of Iceland. We would rely on, when I first flew the Phantom, we relied on Shackletons then. You'd give them about 3 days to get north to where we wanted to be. But then the UK AWACS came on stream. They were extremely useful. So it was very much a coordinated exercise. I intercepted a lot of Russian bombers by day and night at all levels. You might ask, what were they doing? Well, I can tell you that they were doing a number of things. And we knew what they were doing. They were either sort of transiting to Cuba, where they send aircraft down to, or they were coming down to work with the Russian fleet in the North Atlantic, and quite legally too, and work with the submarines, or to occasionally they come down into the North Sea in those days to have a look at the oil rigs. But most of their missions were actually probably to sort of test their sort of do their war mission, which was to get airborne and sort of approach the UK, and then to launch standoff missiles at the UK, which they do from a great range. And our job was to intercept them before they got into a position where they launched their missiles. That's why we operated really so far north. Most of the time we were operating in what we call the Iceland-Faroes Gap. We were 500 miles north of the UK or more. We'd intercept the Russians, which were mainly, quite frankly, when I was flying it, Bears and Badgers. Bears are big aircraft, Badgers jet aircraft, but they were always interesting. They were never. Sometimes they were very similar, but intercepted them at all levels, doing all sorts of things. We took lots of photographs, and it was. Quite frankly, it was exciting stuff. And our sorties from Lucas would normally sort of take about 7 hours, because the other very important aspect of those flights was we'd be with tanker support. So and I can't. Air-to-air refueling was a very important part of our lives as fighter pilot, where most of our aircraft, particularly the Lightning, were fairly short range. The Phantom had much more fuel, and the Tornado even more. But air-to-air refueling was very important, particularly when we were traveling around the world. Right, where we got to now? I read somewhere that the Lightning air pass. Oh, sorry, I didn't ask a question about the Lightning missile. Well, I can tell you that all the Lightnings I flew, we only had heat-seeking missiles. There was in which I flew the Mark 1s, 2s, 2As, which was quite frankly the best Lightning of the lot, and the T4. But the Mark 3s and Mark 6s, they did have the missile I flew with was mainly Firestreak, but the missile that the Mark 3 and Mark 6 squadrons flew with was called Red Top. Some would call it Red Flop, but that was semi-active radar-guided missile. So there was a limited amount of radar-guided missile, but it's worth perhaps mentioning just about the radar, the difference between, for example, in the Lightning, you got one-man band sort of working flat out all the time. We had a radar, and we're traveling around the sky at just under the speed of sound. We had a radar that would pick up targets mainly not outside 25 miles. So you had a limited amount of time to sort of prosecute the attack, and you had to think fast. You had to work fast. You had to think fast, and you did. That was the Lightning radar. The Lightning, we did the job very effectively. But the Phantom, for example, like I said, it was a quadruple jump forward. On the Lightning, we only had 2 missiles, and on the Lightnings I flew, we had an integral gun as well. On the Phantom, we had and a radar that could pick up targets up to about 25 miles. On the Phantom, we had 8 missiles, 4 heat-seeking and 4 radar-guided, and we could carry a gun as well, which was a Gatling gun, and we had a radar that we had a number of sort of modes of radar. Quite frankly, we had a pulse radar, we had a pulse Doppler radar. We could pick targets on the Phantom in excess of 100 miles in pulse Doppler mode. So it was a different, and it was the same in the Tornado, quite frankly. And every aircraft I've flown has been a quantum leap forward. And the Tornado, we had the added ability of being able to track 8 targets at the same time. So, you know, it was all an improvement. That's about the missiles. I heard somewhere that the Lightning's had air pass radar was developed from a Russian. I really can't answer that one, quite frankly. I really can't. I'm sorry. How good were the various British air-to-air missiles for Lightning and Tornado? Well, like I've just said, did you get to fire them? Red Top, Skyflash, ASRAAM, thanks. The answer to that one is every aircraft I've flown, as I've just answered, was a quantum leap forward. Went from fire streak. I fired several fire streak missiles. We used to go to missile practice camps, either sort of at RAF Valley in Wales, where we'd operate and fire in a range in Cardigan Bay, or we'd scramble from, as I've said, from Germany or wherever to go and fire missiles that we were carrying, no notice. The Phantom had improved missiles. When I flew it, it had Sparrow and Sidewinder, and then on the Tornado, I was the very first. We had Skyflash initially, and I was Skyflash and Sidewinder, and I was the very first RAF pilot in service to fire the first Skyflash missile. It was I was above cloud. The target was low level, and below cloud. And all I can say is that the missile was a direct hit. The Skyflash was a good missile, but what came along, by the time the Tornado, for example, went out of service, it was carrying the ASRAAM and the AMRAAM missiles. Those 2 missiles were exceedingly capable. So in answer to your question, the missiles were very capable, but they've been improving all the time, as one would expect. 10 Red Flag or other, I know all about Red Flag. I never attended a Red Flag, mainly not because my boys did, but by the time sort of Red Flag came along, I was in sort of mainly sort of a fairly senior posts, and sort of I was overseeing much of what was going on there. But Red Flag is a very good training ground. What I would say is that the Tornado F3, for example, which had a lot of criticism in its early stages mainly because of the problems we had with the radar, but there's not an aircraft that comes into RAF service, quite frankly, that we don't have problems with, which we sought out in service. That happened with the Tornado. And by the time the Tornado went out of service after 25 odd years, it was a hugely capable aircraft that was really holding its own against much of the surprise of what you would think would sort of much better adversaries. And that was partly due to the capability of the missiles, partly due to the capability of the crews, and also the Tornado. The big advantage of the Tornado, in fact, was we had data link there too. Not on all the squadrons, but some of them. Right, given the incredible technical Adam Cotton sophistication of the current 5th generation jets set to serve for the next 30 years or more, do you think a 6th generation manned fighter is ever going to happen? That's an interesting question. I think it'll probably be I think personally, and I watched the capability, and I'll say 2 things. The first thing is I look back at my own career in the RAF with the aircraft that I've flown and the time that I had and the size of the RAF, the number of squadrons we had and what we did. And I honestly think I had the best of all the times, but I would think that, wouldn't I? These days, you've got the Typhoon, fantastic aircraft, and my last job in the Air Force was director of Typhoon, so I know about the Typhoon. So I was a fighter boy from beginning to end, quite frankly. And now we've got the F-35, hugely capable fighter, but it's just technology is taking it into a different regime. You don't fly the aircraft the same way as we used to fly them in days gone by, but capability-wise, like with every generation, the capability has improved and will continue to improve. Sixth generation, probably what I would predict. I think the days of the unmanned fighter, they're here now, quite frankly. They've been coming progressively. I know Duncan Sands in 1957 said the next fighter will be the last manned fighter in the RAF, when it wasn't. So we've come a long way. So to say that we're going to stop it now, I think even now it's probably premature. I think we're getting closer and closer to it. I think the sixth generation will be what's on the drawing boards now, will be an aircraft that can be manned or unmanned. That's really what I think. What did the Tornado ADB do better than the F-15? Well, the F-15, let's face it, is a superb aircraft. I would say two things probably, and I would never run down the F-15 because the F-15 is just hugely impressive and capable aircraft. But I do think that possibly, and this is debatable, that the data link in the Tornado was probably sort of better than what was in the F-15. I also think that a two-man crew working effectively is a hugely effective crew, and probably better, even if I say it, because I spent the first 10 years of my life in the RAF flying single-seat aircraft. But if you've got two men doing what is a very complex and demanding task and doing it well and well coordinated, the two-man crew is probably an asset as well. I think I'll leave it at that one. Chris here, go the Cobras. Totally agree. Absolutely. 92. I'm a 92 man. Yeah. Superstars. Did you know anyone who was involved in aerial gunnery school that went over for the early days of years? I probably did. Yes. I remember meeting Peter Jago. I knew sort of quite a few people who sort of went to work with the Navy in the States. Yes, I'm absolutely certain I did. I could give you some names, but I won't here. Did you have the chance to fly the J79 powered? The answer to that, we had the J79 powered F4s. That was the extra squadron we got in the RAF, which became 74 Squadron. And the difference between those aircraft and the F4s we had in the RAF was when the RAF bought the F4s, they re-engined them with Spey engines, which were very much designed for low level. So the engines were superb at low level, but tended to run out of puff in the medium levels. And then they were very good when supersonic at high level again. The difference was that the J79s were good engines at all heights, very not dissimilar from the Lightning engines. The J79 was designed to sort of it was probably, from if I say it myself, from my requirements, a better engine than the Spey engines that we had. I heard heard the RAF F4s were better, faster down low. Well, all I can tell you is that down low, all those aircraft were fast. The Lightning, and they were hugely impressive. You really know the place where you really notice speed when you're flying fast is at low level, 250 feet out over the sea. In the Lightning, we were restricted to the aircraft could go fast, but at low level we were restricted to 650 knots, and that was so just you just below would stay subsonic. We go supersonic at height and supersonic in the climb, but at low level it was 650 knots was a limitation on the aircraft, mainly because of the design of the aircraft, in particular the engines, the engine intake, because you get surge down the intake. The Phantom, if I remember correctly, we were restricted to 750 knots, and again, the aircraft would do that no problem at all. Like I've said all along, the Phantom was a hugely capable aircraft all round. The Tornado was the fastest of the lot. You know, the Tornado with its wing sweep, we'd sweep them back from 25 right the way back to 67 wing sweep, and it was like a dart at that speed. The Tornado was restricted to 800 knots at low level. It was the fastest of the lot. And I can tell you that there are those who've said that in miles per hour terms, that they've flown the Tornado at 1,000 miles an hour at low level. That's faster than 850 knots. Where we got to now? Hugh Trevor has done wonders on his nose sections. Any plans to visit soon? I know Hugh Trevor, and he's produced a magnificent. It sits down in at the museum at Old Sarum, and there's a Lightning down there, for example, that bears the colours of 92 Squadron. It was a Lightning F2A, which I've flown on many occasions, and it bears on one side it bears the markings of 92 Squadron, on the other side it bears the markings of 19 Squadron. And I actually went down there sort of for the unveiling of that cockpit down there. So I know Hugh Trevor, and I agree, he's done a hell of a lot. He's worked wonders. Which aircraft did you fly? Did you like flying better, F4 or Tornado? I've said I like flying every aircraft, but I have to be quite honest. I probably enjoyed flying the Tornado better. The F4 was a lovely aircraft. It did have one or two vices, like, for example, because of the design of the aircraft, the wings and what have you, it puffed and blowed all over the place. When we turned under G, you couldn't use the ailerons like one normally would hope to use the ailerons. Under G, or we used to sort of fly angle of attack, in fact, 16 units, I recall, you'd turn on the rudder. So you'd use rudder instead of aileron, because if you used aileron, the aircraft would do the opposite thing of what you were intending to do, mainly because of a thing called adverse yaw. The Tornado was much better as far as that concerned. We had angle of attack again, but the Tornado was absolute. I have to say, the Tornado was an easy aircraft to fly. It was an absolute delight to fly. The cockpit environment was the most comfortable cockpit environment of any fighter that I've flown. So probably I would have to say the Tornado. Could the Phantom outturn the Lightning and Tornado? No. I mean, that's an interesting question. It's called how long is a piece of string, because your ability to turn was dependent on so many different things, like sort of the configuration you were flying in, whether you carrying, how many missiles you had, whether you had tanks on, there's all sorts of things, and how much fuel you had on board. So in certain situations, I mean, you had to know your aircraft, know sort of where it was going to perform best, and use it to its best performance. I would say that probably in different situations, all of those aircraft could outperform each other, but it very much depends on the situation that you find yourself in, and that includes height as well. For example, the Tornado and the Phantom were much better because of the engine performance in the lower levels than the higher levels. But then, you know, when we flew each other, we'd always know the strengths of other aircraft, and we'd done our homework, and we'd fly as pairs, sometimes fours. And in order to kill, if we had a problem with an adversary, then we work out how we're going to kill it. And if he could outturn us, then you probably would do sort of a coordinated attacks. So you sort of pincer movements, as you were, and we kill them that way. So we had the ability, working as a team, to kill aircraft that we shouldn't be killing. And it's all about tactics. It's not just about the aircraft; it's about tactics as well. But and if you do get yourself into a fight, for example, I mean, I would not have liked to have been in a close fight with an F-16, Well, you know the F-16. If you get into a close fight with him, then you've got yourself into problems, and then you've got to escape. So the other thing is, is how and when to escape. We call it bugging out, and you bug out and get away from the fight, and sort of recover yourself and be ready to come back in for the next fight, hopefully unseen, because the best way of killing somebody is get in unseen. Ah, Chris Hewitt, blue circle radar. That's a Tornado F2, as it were. We did have a few aircraft that carried concrete in the nose for a while. That's because of the radar problems we had in the early days. Only a few aircraft, and that was only while radars came out and went back to GEC, as it was then, to be modified to come back into the aircraft. But quite frankly, I think it's a very unfortunate. I have to say, it's a very unfortunate tag that the Tornado fighter version got on it, and it was unfair as well, because the aircraft was always sort of tagged the blue circle aircraft. That aircraft was hugely capable. I've got to tell you that now. It was not the monster that some people sort of depicted as at all. David Smith, I've heard from a lot of pilots that it's the man, not the machine in ACM. Absolutely, well, it's both, and that those skills are highly perishable. How quickly do they perish? Yeah, well, it's a partnership. It's the man working with the machine. It's the man knowing how to use the machine. It's the man understanding sort of the environment that he's fighting in. There are so many, as quite frankly, if you just think, I mean, combat to me, air combat maneuvers, combat to me is the sport of kings. But you think of anything, whether it's on the tennis courts we're watching now at Wimbledon or in sport, if you're going to get to the top of the tree, you've got to understand what you're doing, you've got to train for what you're doing, you've got to know what you're doing. So yes, the more you train, the better you become at it. And I don't think the skills are perishable. I mean, I'd like to think that I can still go back into combat now. I can't. I will never forget. I dream about it most nights. In fact, sport of kings. Yeah, interesting question, but it's a partnership. It's a partnership, aircraft and man. I know the Saudi and Kuwait Lightnings had a multi-role capability. Were there any efforts to equip the RAF ones with this? The answer is yes. There were always efforts to equip the RAF with different capabilities, but it never transpired. So the answer to that one is yes. A friend flew the F-14 ABD models, then later was given the opportunity to fly the Tornado at the end, and it really did compare well. Yeah, I agree. And quite frankly, you know, when I was I was the first person to fly the Tornado. As I said, I formed the OCU, I introduced the aircraft into service, and commanded the first squadron to be declared to NATO. And two of my deputy, who was a backseater, and another pilot had only just come back from an exchange job flying F-14s in America. So, you know, we had it did compare with the F-14. Yeah, it did. You know, different people have different views, and of course, when you look at an aircraft, and different people fly the aircraft at different phases, so they see the capability of an aircraft at one point, when 15 years later it might be a totally different capability. But the F-14 was very comparable to the Tornado, in my view. While I remember, can you recall the serial number of the Lightning that had your name on it? Yeah, it was called. I'll tell you that the tail letter was Romeo. I'd have to get my logbook out. I think it was something like XN 796 or 793. At the top of my mind, at this precise moment, I can't remember. But the tail letter was Romeo. That's what I'll say. What's the impact of Desert Storm on RAF tactics? Well, yeah. Um, Desert Storm was an interesting case. You know, we were coming out of the Cold War at this stage, and more moving into an expeditionary force. And actually, when Desert Storm came along, I was station commander of RAF Lightning in Yorkshire, and I had 3 tornado squadrons there. And I found myself as the very first commander, RAF commander, out in Saudi after Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait, and I'll never forget it. An air marshal at Strike Command called me up, and he's in my office one morning, and he said, "Rick, you know what's going on in Kuwait?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "You know we're looking to send fighters out there." And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "We know we're looking to sort of for somebody to go and command the whole thing." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, you're the man. Get your backside down here for a briefing from the Commander-in-Chief this afternoon to be flying out tonight." All I'll say was, it was a fascinating experience. Very challenging, very demanding, very interesting, and I learnt a lot from it. A lot from it. Have I lost that? Yeah. Impact of Desert Storm. Well, yeah. I mean, quite frankly, you know, RAF tactics are evolving all the time, and we evolve to the requirements of different theatres. And since the end of the Cold War, then certainly sort of Royal Air Force tactics have evolved in a great way. Like I said, it's much more of an expeditionary air force now that has to be prepared for anything. The one thing about the Cold War was we faced an enemy, which we're facing again now. We faced an enemy that we studied all the time. We knew what they had and how they operated, what they did. So we concentrate on that all the time. That's what we train for, all the time. Not knowing when anything was going to happen, in the knowledge that anything could happen anytime. Now we're in a different environment. Well, I say we're moving back probably into a similar environment, but worldwide we're in a different environment. We've got to be prepared for anything, and therefore, dare I say it, a lot more flexible. Do you think pilotability is binary, inherent? Well, that's interesting. I do think, I think the first thing I'll say a couple of things here. If you apply yourself, if you work hard, you will achieve, and you set yourself aims, you will achieve what you want to achieve. Now, there was a stage when I had done my 2 tours on Lightning, so I went to become an instructor on the NAT. And I said to myself at the time, I said, anybody who becomes a student of mine, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to turn them into the best pilot. They'll all be the best pilots. Well, I very quickly realized that actually that wasn't going to be the case, because different people have different abilities, rather like they do on a squash court or a tennis court or a rugby field or whatever. People have got different abilities. Some people have got natural abilities. Some people, some people are well coordinated. I would say that from the flying point of view, if you're well coordinated, that helps greatly. If you've got a mind that can work fast, i.e. sort of mental capacity, and the ability to cope under pressure, that will help you greatly. There are so many different facets. So I think the answer to the question is, yes, you can have natural ability, but it's by no means a given. And at the same time, hard work will help you get to where you want as well. For both attacker fleets and fighters, well, it's all training. And then the other thing is training, quite frankly. Training is so important. Having flown the F4, what's your take on the cancellation of the F-1154? P-1154. Well, I'm probably very sad in a way, but I really don't have much of a view. I'll be quite frank. I don't, except I'm, sad. Flying at Mach 1.2 plus on the deck over the Nellis range is legendary. Tornadoes did during Red Flag. Yep. You said Red Eagle test pilot did too. Should the RAF should have kept the Tornado longer. In my view, yes. The fighter version of the Tornado went out far too early. It was at the peak of its capability then, quite frankly, but it went out because at the time, like we've seen so many times, we saw the Harrier go out, and the Tornado F3 got retired earlier than expected because of defense cuts. And I personally think it's very sad. And in fact, as we going through what we're going through at the moment, I think it's even more sad. It's but that's also the case of RAF aircraft. They tend to get retired probably when they've got years in front of them, and it's probably due to government decisions which are different from perhaps what we in the service would make. But money talks. That's the only thing I'll say. Did the Tornado lose energy quickly if you enter the fight and turn with wings swept? Yes, is the answer to that one. Yes, but if you don't turn too well with the wings swept, quite frankly. But what would happen? We'd enter a fight. If you entered a fight, you'd have the wings swept because you were going very fast. If you entered a fight, your aim would be get down to your. If you're going to fight properly, you need to be what we call our maneuver envelope speed. We knew what was the best speed for us to fight at. So we get down there, and as the speed reduced, we would pull the wings forward. So the wings would be changing all the time. We did it manually. We were at one stage going to have auto wing sweep, but quite frankly, that was getting too expensive to introduce. And if I'm quite honest, you didn't need it. We operated very effectively with manual wing sweep. You just knew where the wings should be, and it was a simple lever to push or pull, and it worked. It worked well. But in answer to your question, sort of yes, you'd lose if your wings were swept. You'd lose speed very quickly in a turn. Did you ever fly the Lightning long haul to the Far East or America? No, I didn't. But I know those who did. I know, and I've read many stories about it. What accidents stand out as the most memorable influence in your flight safety experience? Well, I mean, I was inspector of flight safety for the RAF, which was a fantastic job as an air commodore, because it was the only air commodore job where I had access to every single aircraft in the RAF inventory. I flew absolutely everything. I traveled the world and I met everyone. And I was the eyes and ears. I kept in touch with aircraft. I kept in touch with people. I knew what people were thinking. I spoke to them. I just knew what was going on. It was a fantastic experience. Nobody likes accidents, and I've studied accidents. I've given many talks. I still have a deep interest in aviation safety. In recent years, I mean, for example, I was chairman of the General Aviation Safety Council for 6 years, which I found a fascinating experience. I'm deeply involved with air displays, have been for 25 years plus now, and I've got I could talk about the history of accidents in a big way. And I could talk about accidents relating to types of aircraft as well. I suppose in my time as Inspector of Flight Safety, there were a number of accidents that stood out to me, but I have to say that obviously the one that particularly stood out, I was Inspector of Flight Safety when the Malakantar Chinook accident happened, and that was actually still tying me up, sort of in various interviews and what have you, for probably the next 20 years. But there were many accidents. I don't want to sort of really single them. In fact, some of them were not very pleasant to talk about, and every accident's sad. I mean, one accident, I mean, I was a tornado man, for example, and one of the accidents that happened when I was Inspector Flight Safety was 2 Tornado F3s entering a combat fight, because we normally sort of head to head on the radar, and you do what we call a min separation pass. And on this occasion, for whatever reason that happened, they didn't do a min separation pass. They hit each other at a closing speed of a phenomenal closing speed, and they all ejected at between 500 and 600 knots. They all survived. In fact, there was two ejected. One got back on the ground, but that was an amazing accident. The sequel went on for a long time, but I remember that very well. I remember them all. I could talk individually about them, but I'm not going to single out any one in particular.
So I'm just going to jump in here, Rick. Are you happy to maybe go on till like 8:15 to like finish up the questions?
Yeah, I'm quite happy.
Yeah, okay. Get your questions coming in for until 8:15, guys.
Yep. Were pilots expected to be able to jump into any aircraft from the line and be able to fly it, or were you paired with one aircraft so you could get used to? No, we flew. If we were on a squadron, aircraft were either in the hangar or they were on the line, serviceable or unserviceable. And like I mentioned, on Lightnings, for example, my aircraft was Romeo. If it was on the line, I might fly it, but if it wasn't, I wouldn't fly it. We flew whichever aircraft were there to fly, and whichever we'd have a program, we'd fly whichever aircraft was available to meet our program slot. And I'll be quite honest, while some individual aircraft did have idiosyncrasies, like they flew crooked or a bit bent here or what have you. You just on a squadron you get to know which were aircraft, and quite frankly in the various paperwork we checked before, we could see whether there were anything we needed to be aware of in the aircraft we're going to fly. But in big picture terms, I can tell you that as far as I was concerned, it didn't matter at all, because all the aircraft flew to the same specification. On takeoff, the power was the same. They were basically all the same, but there were differences sometimes. What was the new nav computer like on Tornado? It was very good. Is it true you could listen to an audio cassette? The answer is yes, you could. Yeah, I think you're probably aware of that. You've read the old story about audio cassettes hitting the headlines back in the 1980s. When you're traveling, for example, if we were traveling down to, the longest trip I did on a Tornado was from the UK, from Coningsby in Lincolnshire, down to Oman, to Madeira in Oman. We went with tanker support. I led 4 aircraft down on that. That was a 10.5-hour sortie. That was a long one. Well, you've got to keep yourself amused on sorties like that. And while you're refueling every now and again, and you're doing this and doing that, having an audio cassette, being able to listen to a bit of music every now and again, believe me, it's quite useful. When you're sitting on an ejection seat for 10.5 hours, it's not much fun. I've heard NUSAF and USN had to reevaluate tactics, and some senior pilots wearing 4 stripes and stars are back to teaching younger pilots about the Russians at 30 years ago. Well, I sincerely hope that's the case, quite frankly, because the oldies have always got a lot to teach to the youngies. But time moves on, and basic tactics, like, I could honestly look at you all now and I'll say that when I was a youngster, the Battle of Britain pilots in World War II, of which my father was one, and he was my hero, and they were all heroes. And to this day, they are still my heroes. And quite frankly, they have their attitude to life has driven my life. Now, the tactics that they use, the tactics, basic fighter tactics, in many ways haven't changed. What they have been is adapted to cope with the capabilities of aircraft. Like, for example, the use of data link. You'd be amazed at what that can help you do for you on tactics side. Like the ability of the radar. the capability of the missiles. It's you adapt your tactics to cope with the technology that you have with you. So tactics are evolving and changing all the time. But basically, basic tactics, a lot of basic tactics don't change. Things like what we call low-speed yo-yos, high-speed yo-yos, your knowledge of the aircraft and the ability to turn at the right speed, etc. There are a lot of things that are basic and stay the same. As a child, we used to read Air Clues, a great read, still going strong. Yes, Air Clues is still going strong. It is. I used to write when I used to be responsible for Air Clues, and I won't say that it's had a bit of a coloured history, but certainly when I had control of it, I was very, very happy with it. But it's still going. Yeah. Have you seen the Not Too? If so, your thoughts on it. All I'll say is I want to see the new Top Gun movie as soon as possible. I've been saying that, but I've been such a busy person. I've been tied up, and I'm trying to get my wife to sort of find a date when we can go. But what I can say is I've spoken to a lot of my colleagues, my flying colleagues, and to a man, they've all absolutely loved it. So I know that I'm going to love it. What do I think of the 111? Yeah, I still see the interesting aircraft. It was good aircraft. Well, I must admit, when I was at station commander at Leaming, I used to see more than my fair share of 111s. Because they'd be low flying around the UK a lot at the time, and we quite often get a 111 diverting into Leaming with hydraulic failure in particular. But a very, very capable aircraft. I mean, with its terrain following capability, rather like the bomber version of the Tornado, and what it could do. An interesting sort of thing I always thought about the 111 was the ejection capsule. But it's an interesting aircraft, and it was a hugely capable aircraft too. Without giving away any classified details, at the end of its service, how capable was the F3 in NCTR ID targeting? All I say is good, very good. It was good fairly early on in the service too, as well, actually. Josh Bayless, going back to crews' names on aircraft, was it limited to squadron OCs? No. We had a number. For example, when I was on 92 Squadron, I can tell you we had 12 aircraft on the squadron, and we had 15 pilots, and each aircraft had a name on the side, and so there were only three pilots on the squadron who didn't have their names on the side of the aircraft, and they would always be the most junior pilots. So no, you're not limited to officer commandings or flight commanders at all, although the officer commanding would undoubtedly probably get first choice about which aircraft he wanted his name on, followed by the flight commanders. Cheeky one, did you ever drop your pen in the cockpit? The answer to that one is I'm sure I did. Yes. Yeah, that's not something we try and do, sort of, because I know where you're coming from with that question entirely, and it's a hugely sort of it's a huge problem, because if you drop your pen in the cockpit, then the aircraft is immediately unserviceable, and it has to be dragged in the hangar, and probably the ejection seat removed. The cockpit has to be searched until they found it. It can be a hugely time-consuming task, and so we certainly didn't try and drop anything. We didn't absolute. If we had anything on us, we used to sort of, for example, you didn't carry pens. You emptied your pockets to go flying. And anything you wanted to write with, you'd have strapped to you on your knee pad so that you knew that it wasn't going to drop off, but that didn't stop it happening sometimes. Did you have any in-flight emergencies in contact to contend with? If so, which was the most butt-clenching? Right, I'll tell you that one. That was fairly simple. No, yes, I had plenty of emergencies. I didn't answer an earlier question on this one as well. Probably the most butt-clenching one was I was flying a Phantom from Lucas at the time. I was leading a pair, and it was a night sortie. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and we were going up on a tanker, take fuel, and then fly. It was probably going to be about a 3-hour mission. Probably wasn't going to land until about 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, we went on, and I had a three tank tornado Phantom. We went on. We took on our fuel, and then my number two went US. He had a problem and had to go back to Lucas. In the Phantom you could dump fuel, so he dumped fuel and landed. Well, I wasn't going to dump fuel. I'm going to use it. So thought, well, what should we do? So we went on a practice diversion to Lossiemouth. And so we did the practice diversion, and about 11:30 at night now, and coming down the approach, and I was far too heavy, very heavy aircraft, to put the wheels on the runway and roll. So it was going to be an overshoot only. And as I got down to sort of the overshoot point, which was just above the runway, opened up the engines, and there was an almighty bang, and the whole sky lit up. And air traffic said, gave me a call sign, "You're on fire, you're on fire, you're on fire." And I knew I could see straight away what had happened. The right-hand engine had seized solid, because the RPM had just gone down to 0, just like that. And the fire that they saw was hot blades. An engine had exploded and come out the back of the aircraft. Well, that's fine, because unfortunately, in the Phantom, around each engine we had a containment shield, because if an engine exploded and the blades, and you didn't have a containment shield, and sometimes it has been known for the containment shield to be breached, because if it was breached and the other engine was affected, that it was an eject situation. But I was still in an eject situation, because basically I was so heavy that until I got the reheat light on the other aircraft, then the aircraft wasn't going to fly very far. So I called Mayday, 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 and while putting the burner in on the other engine, which fortunately lit, and then I could gather my speed and sort of start climbing away. The hot blades, I said, were blades coming. The fire was the hot blades coming out the back end of the aircraft. Anyway, about this point, I think my navigator, I call him navigator, but he's a fighter gator in a Phantom, woke up and said, and excuse any ladies listening, excuse the words, said, "Oh, what the fuck's going on?" And I said, "Don't worry, Pete. Everything's under control now." And I then dumped fuel and landed, and we went to the bar and had a drink, and then air traffic came into the bar with 2 big bags of engine blades. So that's probably the closest I ever got to ejecting, if I'm quite honest. I didn't have to eject because things happened, but had things not happened, I would have definitely had to eject. So that was that little story. F1B Emlyn became the Royal Australian Air Force as a conversion for export. Yeah, I knew that, and I visited the interesting. This is very interesting, in fact, because back when I was Inspector of Flight Safety, the Australians were losing quite a lot of aircraft. Well, in fact, the Australian military, all the armed forces, were losing quite a lot of aircraft. And the chief of the Royal Australian Air Force came to the chief of the RAF and asked if I could go out to Australia to do an audit, a safety audit of his Air Force, which I thought was a very, very brave thing to do. And I went out there, and I had a magnificent sort of month in Australia. I was very well looked after by them, and I had a fascinating time, and I traveled all over, and I did the safety audit, and I wrote my report at the end, and it had something like 230 recommendations. All I can say is that I presented my report before I left to the Deputy Chief of the Australian Air Force, and he accepted the report in toto, and implemented every single recommendation in the report. And what I find very satisfying is that the accident rate it just plummeted and stayed down. So clearly, sort of the audit had the right effect. But why did I raise that? That was to tell you a little side story, because while I was there, I went to the Royal Australian Air Force base at Amberley up in in Queensland, which where the 111s were based, and where there were some ex-RAF pilots flying with them, in fact. So I'll never forget that. That was a very interesting visit, and a very capable aircraft that was too. And of course, the aircraft flew very successfully with the Australian Air Force for quite a number of years. It was the last one to go out. As a pilot of Aldergrove at the time, I have my own view of the Mull of Kintyre crash. I do understand that. We're embarrassed by the reaction of the RAF in blaming the crew. What I've got to say about that is that I had nothing to do with that whatsoever. Basically, sort of the way at the time the Board of Inquiry was convened. It was convened by the air officer commanding of the group concerned in the accident. I provide Board of Inquiry advisors just to advise on Board of Inquiry procedures. They conducted, so I didn't conduct the inquiry. The inquiry was conducted by them, and then it came back to them. The only thing I would, as I say, provide advisors, and at the end of it all, when it all be concluded, my staff would draft a sort of a report that would be published. I've always stayed entirely neutral on this one. I obviously have my own views, but I'm not, because of my job at the time, I'm not allowed to sort of be seen to be sort of one way or the other. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that one direct. I have to really stay neutral to this day. But I do understand what you're saying. I do, believe me.
Right, Rick, do you want to maybe answer one or two more questions? And I've got one at the end for you, so like be prepared for that.
Thank you very much for this. I went up in a Lightning as a teenager, and it's one of the highlights of my life. I fully understand that, believe me, you lucky person, and I'm lucky too. Down low at sea level, a light and clean F-111 could also super cruise. Very clean design. No, I agree with you entirely. Absolutely. You know, it had the ability to sweep its wings too. That's why. What's your opinion of the TSR-2? Would it have been as good as many people? I think the TSR-2, and I'm not an expert on the TSR-2, was way ahead of its time from a technology point of view. So I think it would have been a fantastic aircraft in all probability. But I also think it would have, in all probability, been a hugely expensive aircraft to run. So I think, you know, that. But there's no doubt about its capability and technology-wise. And let's face it, we've all seen sort of the technology in the UK. You know, look back at. I never cease to be amazed at what's been achieved in the aviation world in the 110 years or whatever it is now that aviation has been sort of such developing. It's absolutely quite amazing, and it continues to be amazing. So, you know, I won't be here in 100 years' time, but one thing's for sure is the world will be a very different place in 100 years' time, and aviation will be a very different world as well. Whether it's unmanned, I think that space will be sort of much more prevalent, and I think we're talking about hypersonic. I just, it's difficult to comprehend, but there are big changes coming down the line. That's for sure. One more question. All right. I'm just going down further on down to the bottom. My brother-in-law is on 36 Squadron C-17s at Amberley. Good, excellent. C-17s are good aircraft too. I actually, when I did a tour in America, sort of, I was one of the air attaches in the embassy in Washington. I used to get around. I had responsibility for all the exchange officers throughout America. In fact, I had responsibility for all RAF personnel in America. So I used to travel widely. And when I used to go out to the bases, I used to fly a lot. F-16s, F-15s, you name it. But I do remember one particular trip talking about the C-17. It was at a C-5 Galaxy, in fact. and I can't remember the base I flew it from, but I went on a low level. I flew it the whole time. And I remember flying the C-5 Galaxy. I thought, this is a huge aircraft, but it was such a beautiful aircraft to fly. I just couldn't believe that such a big aircraft was actually so easy and sort of comfortable to fly. It didn't feel like a heavy aircraft at all. It was sad to see the Harrier retire. I totally agree. A friend of mine flew it for the Marines. What did you think of the Harriers? The Harrier, I've flown the Harrier. The Harrier, lovely aircraft, hugely capable. And, we all know about the Harrier and love the Harrier. We all want to see more of the Harrier, and I think we will see more of the Harrier in the future, because I know that some are being redeveloped. But I always felt that it was very sad to see the demise of the Harrier, for two reasons, really. Well, three reasons. One, because of the aircraft that it was. Two, because at the time we just spent billions of pounds as a country on developing the new Harrier GR9, which had just come into service, and then it was retired. And yes, the US Marines very much benefited from our sort of losing the Harriers, and they took them on at really sort of for very little price indeed. So they got a real bonus, and we lost. That raises the question at the time, because it was either going to be the Harrier or the Tornado that sort of went, and the decision was made to keep the Tornado bomber going. Now, I think that's if I wouldn't have liked to have seen either aircraft going, and I didn't like seeing the Harrier going, but the decision, I think, was the right one. And why do I think it was the right one? Because the Tornado, as is proven time again, is a hugely capable aircraft, and whereas the Harrier was very much sort of designed for close air support, the Tornado was designed for many more missions than that. So I think the Tornado was right decision to keep the Tornado going, because it had many more capabilities than the capabilities that the Harrier was designed for.
So Rick, I'm gonna enter I'm gonna get one question here while we wrap up the Q&A. So obviously you're going to RIAT. If you could go in the past, which one would you like to see flying at a display? Lightning, Phantom, or Tornado F3?
Well, I'll give you a quick answer, Mike. I'd actually like to see all three flying, but if you want me to narrow it down to one, it has to be the Lightning.
Wow. Okay.
And I know you're a Tornado man, and I'm a Tornado man as well. But and I say the Lightning because the Lightning did some fantastic displays, but it was a much noisier aircraft than the other two as well. That's probably not true. Not noisier than the Phantom. But I don't know. I just got to say the Lightning, because I know how many people would just love to see the Lightning flying again. But believe me, I would love to see the Phantom, and I would dearly love to see the Tornado flying. I loved all those aircraft.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great answer. But yeah, folks, thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, just remember, like you can see in the corners of the screen here, Rick and Tom have got the new book out. All the links are in the description. And if you are lucky to go to RIAT on the 16th or 17th, they will be at the Aviation Bookshop to sign and get their new book. And I'm sure, like, if you have Rick's book already, Rate of Climb, I'm sure Rick will be happy to sign that. But there's copies there that he's going to bring with him. But Rick, thank you very much for joining us on this Q&A. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Mike, it's been my absolute pleasure. I always enjoy, thank you for inviting me back. I know I've done 2 or 3 before now, and I loved doing those before, and I've enjoyed this one immensely as well. I really do enjoy the opportunity and the experience.
Yeah, well, the pleasure's all mine, Rick. So again, thank you everyone who joined us tonight, this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. But thank you very much, and yeah, I'm sure we'll get Rick on again in the future. So thank you very much. Cheers, Rick.
Cheers, Mike.